What X-rated history facts don't they teach you in school? X-rated for violence rather than sexuality. But if you want the most absolutely reviling accounts of human brutality imaginable, read a short account of the destruction of the Indies by Bartolomé de las Casas. One of the most memorable stories to me was Dart. A Spaniard who was out hunting deer or rabbits realized that his dogs were hungry and, not finding anything they could hunt, took a little boy from his mother, cut his arms and legs into chunks with his knife and distributed them among his dogs. Once they had eaten up these steaks, he threw the rest of the carcass on the ground for them to fight over. It wasn't just disease that wiped out Native Americans so quickly in South America. The Spaniards were responsible for the genocide of hundreds of thousands. In West Berlin, during the Cold War, the East Germans, and the Russians who helped them, opened a number of gay nightclubs and bars, hoping to use them as honey traps to blackmail and embarrass U.S. military personnel who might frequent them. The bars became so popular with the, at the time, underground gay culture in Berlin, that they stopped bothering to use them as honey traps because they could make more money by simply running the places as nightclubs and bars. Pedro I of Brazil, a.k.a. Pedro Ivy in Portugal, was a well-known party boy and womanizer. His fame was so great that, when he got widowed, 8 princesses from European royal houses explicitly declined his marriage proposal, making the Brazilian ambassador in Europe look like a fool. Amalie of Leuchtenberg, granddaughter of the King Maximilian I of Bavaria, took one for the team, married him at the tender age of 17, and Pedro remained faithful to her until his death. Pedro remained faithful to her until his death. The Roman Emperor Elagabalus, as a show of power upon entering Rome to become crowned emperor, he had hundreds of naked women drag his chariot down the streets of Rome. He was a weird. I remember another story about him where he would stand naked at the entrance of some temple and bid anyone, and I mean anyone. Mozart was very fond of scatological humor. He wrote several songs about ting on people or just ting in general. And he also sent some really filthy letters to his sister. That one of the single biggest problems on the Lewis and Clark expedition was that they ran out of mercury after using it to treat rampant STDs, mainly syphilis. In fact, they used so much of it that some of their campsites, they had more than 600 on the journey, have been positively identified by literally measuring the mercury in the latrines they dug nearby. Also, that York Clark's one slave he brought along on the trip was so exotic to many of the native tribes they passed that many thought he was magical and far more interesting than the 24 white people around him. Many native women wanted to, and did, have sex with him, and several chiefs apparently offered up their daughters to him for the night in hopes that he would impregnate them and leave some of his magic powers behind to bless the tribe. Additionally, one chieftain thought he was a practical joke the white people were playing on the gullible natives by painting up one of their men. The chief even tried to rub the paint off before believing that was his real skin color. Victor Hugo slept with so many prostitutes that on the day he died, all the brothels in Paris were closed because so many of the prostitutes took the day off to mourn him. Edit. I love this is, by far, my highest rated comment. A 1st century BCE letter from a Roman poet to his critics. Translated. I will sodomize you and face you, cocksucker Aurelius and catamite furious. You who think, because my verses are delicate, that I am modest. Asterisk. For it's right for the devoted poet to be chaste himself, but it's not necessary for his verses to be so. Asterisk. Verses which then have taste and charm, if they are delicate and SI, and can incite an itch. And I don't mean in boys, but in those hairy old men who can't get their flaccid dicks up. Asterisk. You. Because you have read of my 1,000 kisses, you think I'm a sissy? Asterisk. I will sodomize you and face you. Didn't know they had Xbox Live back then. Historical medicine is pretty much convinced that all the major conquerors were in some stage of syphilis. pretty much implies they ate a lot as they traveled. And ate anyone everyone they wanted to on the road. The first thing the father of microbiology, Anton van Leeuwenhoek, put under a microscope was semen. They understood that semen was integral to the creation of life but didn't yet understand the concept of single-cell organisms. He fully expected to see tiny little humans in his jizz. So yeah. The first thing he did was whack off on a slide and look at it. But for science, my boy. Science. Thanks for the gold-masked stranger. The French government sent free prostitutes to the actual pirates of the Caribbean to fight all the situational homosexuality that would arise. My understanding is that most common folk throughout much of history had very meager lodgings. And most families would sleep together both for warmth as well as the simple fact that they didn't have the space for people to sleep separately. If mom and dad were in the mood to procreate, the rest of the family was just there. Isaac Newton was obsessed with the lost art of alchemy. He also was said to have died a virgin, but had a strange obsession with blood. Specifically the menstrual blood of S, which he thought had magical properties. The walls of his room were painted red for this reason. Little no physics fact. Many of the Native American names you read in history books have been translated into their English equivalent. Many times when they haven't, it's because they were very raunchy. A name like Buffalo Cum wasn't uncommon. Source: Empire of the Summer Moon. Quanah Parker and the Rise and Fall of the Comanches. Frankenstein author Mary Shelley lost her virginity on her mother's grave. Also, she carried around her dead husband's heart in a bag until her death. As when she burnt his body, it was the only part of him that didn't burn. Edit. Several people have pointed out it was actually his liver, which she believed to be his heart. Either way, it's weird. Ben Franklin was known to take air baths. He would sit in a room for hours, totally nude. He believed it was good for overall health. Removed. Pirates loved them some an LSX during the golden age of piracy. They would usually take turns being the ahem receptive partner. And it was considered tacky to refuse to be said receptive partner when it was your turn. We always get new guys when they come on the ship with this one. You can use the hole in the barrel every day but Thursday. Why not Thursday? That's your day in the barrel. Edit. Of course my gold cherry would be popped on a comment about ForceBot.SX. Thanks kind stranger. Alfred Hitchcock basically ended Tippi Hedren's career because she refused to sleep with him after he made her a star. Hitchcock didn't even pretend to not be a dick about some things. After he got flack for saying actors are cattle, he called the newspaper and told them he meant to say actors should be treated as cattle. In ancient Rome, babies weren't considered people until they were older. So if you gave birth to a child you didn't want, you could dispose of it in the same place where you disposed of all the other unwanted substances that came out of your body. The outhouse toilet poop hole in a field. No one questioned this unless the child was obviously of a certain age. Archaeologists find a lot of baby skeletons when they discover the toilet sewers near ruins of Roman brothels. It's not just ancient times. Up until about the 1920s, doctors and midwives in the U.S. would routinely euthanize deformed or defective children shortly after birth. A good portion of the reduction in birth mortality during the early 20th century was due to moving births into hospitals where the practice was banned. Chambermaids to 18th century French aristocrats were expected to masturbate their male teenage charges at bedtime, so as to coax a better night's sleep from them. Help wanted. Chambermaid. Great pay. 10-15 mins of work per day. Edit. After reading this thread, I bet every single moderator of our Ask Historians currently has a migraine. Cleopatra was obsessed with sex and used to experiment with DLDO technology, which didn't take off really until they lost the pyramid shape. King Louis V had trouble impregnating Marie Antoinette because he had phimosis. At the time, he was fascinated with locks, so his opponents made jokes about the locksmith having trouble finding the keyhole. Edit. Please stop commenting about your degenerate penises. I don't need to know. Julie d'Aubigne was a famous 17th century French opera singer who once took the holy vows to enter a convent just so she could have sex with a nun. She also had a habit of seducing women at parties, which would lead their husbands to challenge her to a duel. She was an expert duelist and killed 10 men like this. Edit. 17th century, not 18th. Vlad the Impaler. The 15th century leader of what is today Romania and also the inspiration for the character Dracula, was extremely creative in coming up with painful ways to kill prisoners. He decided that impaling people through the ass with sharp wooden stakes and letting a horse pull you until it came out through your face wasn't painful enough. So he decided to stop using sharply pointed stakes and a horse and instead switch to impaling people with a flat stake and turn it vertically as to allow gravity to do all of the work. That way none of your organs get pierced, so the process takes a lot longer. He would also sometimes have his meals brought to him while he watched this happen, so that helped inspire the myth that he was eating the people he killed. Not specific to any person in history, but if you go to South Korea, vendors will sell these little letter openers that make nice souvenirs with a little sheath. Historically, women carried them so that they could kill themselves if they were ever arped. Could they not be used for protection from RP? Benjamin Franklin had a gilf fetish. He wrote a long letter to a friend advising of the benefits of taking an older woman as a mistress. His reasons included: they are more thankful for the attention. They are more adventurous than younger women. They are experienced and needs not be trained. They are less likely to betray you in favor of another man. Edit. He was also very clear that the face ages, but the downstairs does not. In the dark. One of the first devices to measure time was the water clock. It was basically a dish that had a small hole in the bottom and was put in a larger dish of water. When the smaller dish filled with water and sank, it made a satisfying clunk sound. This, of course, meant your time with the prostitute was up. I feel like this question is so good it deserves its own subreddit. When Blackbeard blockaded Charleston Harbor in 1718, he didn't ask for gold. He demanded medicine. The salacious part of this request is what type of medicine was requested. You see, he requested mercury and injection equipment. Back in the day, mercury injected into the urethra was thought to be a cure for gonorrhea. And after a long stint in the brothels of Barbados, most of the men in his fleet were completely infested. Thus, Blackbeard the pirate captured Charleston Harbor because his man parts were causing him issues, so to speak. They don't tell you this in Assassin's Creed. The RP of Nanking was literal, meaning the Japanese RP'd everyone, even as young as 6. I learned that in school actually. Seems a bit much for high school maybe. Christopher Columbus kidnapped a Carib woman and gave her to his crew to RP. Michel de Cuneo, who participated in Columbus's second expedition to the Americas. While I was in the boat, I captured a very beautiful woman, whom the Lord Admiral, Columbus, gave to me. When I had taken her to my cabin she was naked, as was their custom. I was filled with a desire to take my pleasure with her and attempted to satisfy my desire. She was unwilling, and so treated me with her nails that I wished I had never begun. I then took a piece of rope and whipped her soundly, and she let forth such incredible screams that you would not have believed your ears. Eventually we came to such terms, I assure you, that you would have thought she had been brought up in a school for S. I had the unique experience of attending the same school from 4th grade until 12th. It went from nursery to 12. My 5th grade teacher was also my 12th grade homeroom teacher. I fondly remember one afternoon, standing by her desk as she smoked a cigarette on her lunch break. Welcome to the 80s, as she exhaled and looked at me, saying, "Do you remember back in 5th grade when I taught you the significance of women coming to the New World to start families with the settlers? Yeah. They were all prostitutes. We don't teach ya that in 5th grade." Ben Franklin was known to participate in an orgy or two. furthering the compelling theory that Ben Franklin is reincarnated as Frank Reynolds. Theodora, Empress of Byzantine in the 6th century, was an actress and almost certainly an escort prostitute before she married Emperor Justinian. But she was a damn good empress anyway. Stalin had SZL relations and impregnated a 13-year-old girl while in his 30s. Well, that is hardly the worst thing Stalin did. When mummifying particularly beautiful women, the Egyptians waited several days for the body to deteriorate to stop the men being tempted to. Well, yeah. Herodotus noted it in his histories. Well, he's not particularly reliable. He also talked about giant ants that people used to mine gold in the deserts. Ben Franklin liked to sunbathe nude in his front window. His neighbors didn't like it much. The vibrator was invented for doctors who were getting carpal tunnel from using their fingers to give female patients orgasms in order to treat hysteria. I'm on holiday in Prague with my friends. We visited the SX Machine Museum for a laugh. Came out having actually learned a thing or two about religion, medicine, social practices, and of course machinery. Highly recommend it. Napoleon loved stinky PSSY. He wrote his lover instructing her to not wash up before he got back. In Greece they teach us a lot about ancient Greece, obviously. But they dare not to mention the homosexuality. Because the church would go mad. America crucified a bunch of Mexicans, and I believe Irish deserters, during the Mexican-American War to intimidate them into surrendering. Pretty friggin' brutal. In the Middle Ages, it was considered perfectly normal for nuns to masturbate to the image of Jesus. Hans Christian Andersen was a chronic masturbator and would shoot his cum on by passing children at times. He also had a fear of real sex. Origin of the witch's broomstick. Women would soak a wooden DLDO in psychoactive alkaloids, then insert it in the vagina for a contact high. Not much of a logical step to proceed from this to riding a flying broomstick between the legs. May I add LBJ? He called his penis Jumbo and had a habit of proving it to anyone that walked into the White House. He also liked to call meetings and then proceed to drop a juice with the door open. Hans Christian Andersen had a masturbation diary. He would even rate his faps. Edit. My top rated comment is about a fairy tale writer and his fap diary. People invented an L. Pretty sure an L has been a thing since. Like. The second day butts and dicks were things. The sheer amount of RP that happened in China and Korea during World War II by Japanese soldiers. They used industrial efficiency techniques to service as many men in as short a period of time as possible. Reading the details of it all in James Bradley's Fliboys made me nauseous. It must have been absolute hell on earth for those women. Empress Wu Hu of China apparently had a tough time with sex discrimination. She saw sex and power as being closely related. So when she held court, government officials and visiting dignitaries had to pay their respects by licking her lotus stamen. A symbolical display of her superiority over men. She was a ruthless leader and was known for executing many bureaucrats and relatives. She also kept a harem of young male concubines and got gangbanged almost nightly until her death at the age of 83. That's where the term woohoo came from. The Reynolds pamphlet. Highlights. I've always wondered how the conversation between the crew and Blackbeard went. Alright, you drippy dicked sacks of. We'll pull over at Charleston and get you something. Now quit your bitcoin. When Rome was founded, it had a distinct deficit of women. To solve this, they had a big old feast with the neighboring tribes. Got everyone drunk. And then killed the men and married the women. Bada bing, a world power is born. That alert of slavery throughout human history was about sex. That alert of slavery throughout human history was about sex. This. In the 70s, Tsar kidnapped thousands of Guatemalan kids and teenagers in the name of biochemical defense. They infected them with diseases they thought was apt for terrorism and then tried different cures. and then killed them if they happened to survive. The Romans had massive gay orgies daily. Everyone had a gay lover. The more wealthy ones had young, beautiful, gay twinks living with them. The gay twink would get benefits while living with the said wealthy man. Yes, they were the first to create sugar daddies. Those in the army would screw each other. They were miles away from home for months, even years. They had natural manly urges to something, so they screwed their fellow men. The president would sometimes have sex with congressmen. It would help with passing some laws and settling differences. King would have dozen of wives and dozen more men on the side too. Just a whole lot of gay in Rome. Ah. The Puritans were very promiscuous. So once you're married, you're allowed to sleep with anyone. Not just the person you married. In World War II, the Russians used to train dogs to sniff out landmines and step on them and also run after enemy tanks with explosives attached to them. Edit. The Russians also had a moose cavalry. According to the UCMJ, Uniformed Code of Military Justice, the only approved SZUL position is missionary. During World War II, the Japanese Imperial Army would kidnap women from occupied territories and force them into SZUL slavery. These women were referred to as comfort women as they were shipped out with comfort supplies like soap and like Japanese and South Korean Thais are still suffering for this. Marrying your cousin has been a very common occurrence throughout history. That Hitler tried to give the Jews to another country and even offered to put them on a boat. However, all the countries said nope, we don't want them. And so you know the rest. Yeah. We act like Germany was the only place ripe with antisemitism. Those opinions were pretty common around the Western world at that time. But we like to imagine the rest of the West was horrified about the treatment of Jewish people under the Nazis. And that's why we went to war. That isn't the case. Ben Franklin loved Parisian hookers. The double helix structure of DNA was thought of while tripping on LSD. The Greek gods put their dick in everything. Mortal here. I can confirm this. King Joffrey Baratheon's father was his uncle, Sir Jaime Lannister. Just about every culture participated in slavery. There have been many systematic genocides throughout history. The Holocaust wasn't an isolated event. Royals would get people to watch them have sex so that there was confirmation of their offspring being a legitimate heir. Edit. Okay, I see a lot of people were taught this at school. I don't recall it, so apologies. But then in year 8 we also didn't have an actual history teacher for the year, so that might be why. Edit 2. Original year 8 teacher left after about a month of the school year due to rumored alcoholism. Rest of the year we had different substitute teachers and we told them we were watching Titanic, so we basically spent a whole year watching Jack Draw Rose like one of his French girls. And royal births would have packed rooms to watch the potential heir emerge so as to stave off accusations of an imposter. Cleopatra invented the first vibrator using a gourd filled with angry bees. Oh, it broke. I also heard she had slaves stir it into a cup so she could rub the cum on her face. Not only is this hot, but cum does do good things for the skin. President Washington ate so much PSSY his teeth rotted out and he had to have ivory implants put in. Sigmund Freud, one of the fathers of modern psychology, really liked cocaine. He would prescribe cocaine to his patients and would use it regularly. He also said that all people have an innate desire to sleep with their parent, all boys want to sleep with mom, and all girls want to sleep with dad. Yup. This guy is one of the founders of modern psychology. But to be fair, he did work a lot with the subconscious mind, and that was huge to understanding how people think and act. James Buchanan, 15th President of the US, was likely gay or bisexual. He was unmarried as president, the first and only president so far to not be married while in office, and had a close male friend that was a bit closer than men got back at the time. He did have a fiancée at one point, but she died long before he became president. And he never showed interest in other women after that. Not very X-rated at all. Kinda sweet actually. But yeah. Benjamin Franklin was a horny old monger. Despite the fact that the Puritans' religion forbid them from having sex, Puritans had a whole of it anyways. It frowned upon extra and premarital sex. Once you were married you could have as much sex as you wanted. After all, how the else are you going to populate the colony with good Puritan children? I'll have to look this up when I get home for sources. But this is a misnomer. They hated sex outside of marriage. But within the bounds of marriage it was downright encouraged. Celebrated even. A distinct difference between the Catholic Church of the time, which viewed marriage as a distant second to celibacy. Sex for the Puritans was a gift from God. Within marriage, Marcus Tullius Cicero had to defend Clodius Pulcher, who was known to have disguised himself as a Vestal Virgin for the Bonadi rites. The Bonadi rites were held at the home of the chief magistrate, who at that time was Julius Caesar. He was discovered and chased out, and many assumed that he disguised himself in order to sleep with Caesar's wife. Addition. This is the same Clodius Pulcher who was known to sleep with his sister, who was also the woman nicknamed Lesbia by the poet Catullus. Correction. Cicero was defending Clodius, who was being smeared by Clodius and his sister. Much of these allegations against Clodius came from Cicero trying to smear the accusers back. Karl Tanzler was an old German bacteriologist in Key West, Florida during the early 20th century. He became infatuated with a sick young Cuban woman. When she died he mourned her death for 2 years, before digging up her corpse and fixing it up like you would a dead cat. He dated the corpse for 7 years, even having sex with it, before he was found out. The family of the woman didn't seem too bothered about his actions with their dead relative. The corpse is now in a museum. Most kings murder their entire family when they come to power or are in power. Herod is a good example of this. Something about having that power and the fear of losing it seems to drive most people insane eventually.